A pregnant teen was given to a billionaire as punishment by her own father. He thought she'd ruined the family's name. So he handed her over like property, hoping she'd disappear. But when the billionaire opened his door, he didn't see a scandal. He saw a broken soul who needed saving. At first she was terrified, alone, ashamed, and sure he'd treat her like everyone else had. But instead of hate, he offered something she'd never felt before. Kindness. Just as her heart starts to heal, the world turns against them. Her father exposes their secret, the internet explodes, and suddenly her past comes crashing back with a vengeance. And when tragedy strikes, she's forced to choose between protecting the man who saved her or the baby she loves. Because in a world that judged her for her mistakes, he was the only one who saw her worth. But can love born out of punishment truly set them both free? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The pewter clouds hung low over rural Georgia that Sunday afternoon, matching the heavy atmosphere inside Reverend Samuel Booker's grand parsonage study. 17-year-old Mia Booker sat rigid in the leather armchair, her trembling hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. The mahogany grandfather clock in the corner measured each excruciating moment with its resonant ticking, filling the spaces between her father's harsh words. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" Reverend Booker's voice cut through the air as he paced across the Persian rug. His polished shoes made dull thuds with each step. "To my reputation. To this church." Mia blinked back tears, her chin quivering. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered, but the words seemed to bounce off him like rain on a window. The Reverend's face tightened. "Sorry doesn't undo the shame you've brought upon this house. The church board knows now." He stopped pacing to stare out the study window, where fat raindrops had begun to fall. "Everyone knows." Thunder rolled in the distance as if emphasizing his words. Mia flinched at the sound, shrinking deeper into the chair. The leather creaked beneath her, and she wished she could disappear into it completely. A sharp knock at the study door made both father and daughter turn. Reverend Booker's expression shifted from anger to something more controlled, the face he wore for his congregation. "Come in," he called out, straightening his tie. The door opened to reveal Graham Whitmore, his tall frame filling the doorway. Despite his wealth and status as a prominent philanthropist, he carried himself with quiet humility. His salt-and-pepper hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his kind eyes immediately found Mia's tearful face. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming on such short notice," Reverend Booker said, his voice taking on an oily smoothness that made Mia's stomach turn. "I trust you understand the delicate nature of our situation." Graham nodded slowly, his gaze still lingering on Mia. "Reverend Booker, perhaps we should discuss this privately first." "There's nothing to discuss that can't be said in front of her," the Reverend replied coldly. "She's the source of this disgrace, after all. Let her hear how her sin has forced my hand." Mia's fingers dug into the arms of the chair as her father continued. "Mr. Whitmore, you've done remarkable work with your orphanages and youth programs. The Lord has blessed you with both means and mercy." He paused, lightning illuminating the study through the rain-streaked windows. "I believe divine providence has brought you here today." Graham's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, a mix of concern and barely contained disapproval. "What exactly are you proposing, Reverend?" "I'm offering you the chance to take this girl off my hands." Reverend Booker's words fell like ice into the room. "Consider it an extension of your charitable works. She needs guidance, structure, something I clearly failed to provide." "Daddy, please!" Mia burst out, rising from her chair. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for him. "Please don't send me away. I'll do anything. I'll hide until the baby comes. Silence! The Reverend's command cracked like a whip. You lost the right to call me that when you brought this shame upon us. Graham stepped forward, his presence somehow both commanding and gentle. Reverend, surely there's another way to handle this. She's your daughter. Was my daughter. Reverend Booker corrected, moving to his desk. He pulled out a document, already prepared. These papers will transfer all rights of her care to you, Mr. Whitmore. I've had my lawyer draw them up properly. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows as Mia watched her father pick up his fountain pen. Daddy, she pleaded one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared. But the Reverend's hand moved steadily across the paper, his signature flowing in black ink like a final judgment. The sound of the pen scratching against paper seemed to echo in Mia's ears, drowning out even the thunder. Graham's jaw tightened as he witnessed the scene, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. I'll need to have my lawyer review these documents. Of course. Reverend Booker replied, sliding the papers across his desk. But she leaves with you today. I won't have her under this roof another night. Graham turned to Mia then, extending his hand with infinite gentleness. You're safe now, child, he said softly, his words carrying a warmth that had been absent from her father's voice for months. Mia looked at his offered hand through her tears, then back at her father, who had already turned away to face the window. With trembling fingers, she reached out and placed her hand in Graham's. His grip was firm but tender, anchoring her as she rose from the chair on unsteady legs. They walked out of the study together, leaving Reverend Booker to his solitary vigil at the window. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway, accompanied by the continuing symphony of rain and thunder. Graham's car waited in the circular driveway, its black surface gleaming with raindrops. He opened the passenger door for Mia, shielding her from the rain with his own body as she carefully lowered herself into the seat. Once he was behind the wheel, they sat in silence as the engine hummed to life. The windshield wipers began their rhythmic sweep, clearing away the rain as lightning flickered across the sky. Neither spoke as Graham guided the car down the long driveway, away from the only home Mia had ever known. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching as the parsonage grew smaller in the side mirror, until finally it disappeared completely into the storm-grey afternoon. The luxury SUV purred down the rain-slicked highway, its wipers keeping steady time against the falling rain. Mia sat curled against the passenger window, her small suitcase clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. The leather seats were soft and warm, but she remained rigid, uncertainty evident in every line of her body. Graham glanced at her occasionally as he drove, noting how she made herself as small as possible in the spacious seat. The rain created a cocooning silence around them, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder growing more distant as they left the storm behind. Are you comfortable? Graham asked softly, keeping his voice gentle. I can adjust the temperature if you're cold. Mia shook her head slightly, her fingers tightening on the worn handles of her suitcase. Her stomach growled audibly in the quiet car, making her cheeks flush with embarrassment. When did you last eat? Graham asked, though he kept his eyes carefully on the road to avoid making her more uncomfortable. Mia's voice was barely above a whisper. Yesterday morning, I think. Graham's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. There's a good diner about 10 minutes ahead. They make excellent soup. Mia didn't respond, but Graham took the next exit anyway. The neon signs of May's Diner glowed through the misty evening, its windows warm and inviting. He pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, choosing a spot near the door to minimize Mia's exposure to the rain. Let me get that. he said as she reached for her door handle. He came around with an umbrella, shielding her as she stepped out, still clutching her suitcase. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The few patrons looked up, their curious gazes lingering on Mia's obvious pregnancy and her tear-stained face. Whispers started almost immediately. Graham guided her to a booth in the corner, positioning himself so his broad shoulders blocked most of the stairs. A waitress approached, her name tag reading Betty, her eyes flickering between them with barely concealed curiosity. "What can I get you folks?" she asked, pen poised above her pad. "The vegetable soup, please," Graham ordered, "and some chamomile tea if you have it." He looked at Mia. "Would you like anything else? Perhaps some toast?" Mia shook her head, studying the worn Formica tabletop as if it held great mysteries. The whispers continued from the other tables, words like shame and disgrace floating through the air like poison. Graham cleared his throat loudly, turning to fix the other diners with a steady gaze. One by one, they looked away, returning to their own meals. When the soup arrived, steam rising invitingly from the bowl, Graham pushed it gently toward Mia. "You need to eat," he said quietly. "For both of you." Mia picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The first sip seemed to awaken something in her, and she began eating with more purpose, though still keeping her eyes down. "We have about 4 more hours to drive," Graham explained as she ate. "My estate is in the mountains of North Carolina. It's quiet there. Peaceful." He paused, watching her scrape the bottom of the bowl. "Would you like more?" She shook her head, finally looking up at him. "Why are you doing this?" Graham considered her question carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because no one should be thrown away for making a mistake." The drive resumed in silence, the highway stretching endlessly before them. As the hours passed, Mia's grip on her suitcase gradually loosened. Her head began to nod, exhaustion finally overwhelming her defenses. "Daddy, please," she murmured in her sleep, her face contorting with pain. "I'm sorry. So sorry." Graham's jaw tightened at her words, but he kept driving, the SUV eating up the miles as the night deepened around them. The rain had stopped, leaving a clear sky studded with stars. As they climbed into the mountains, the air grew clearer, fresher. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in pastel hues when they pulled up to the estate. Mia was still sleeping soundly, her face finally peaceful. Rather than wake her, Graham carried her inside, leaving her suitcase in the car for later. The guest room had been prepared, its cream-colored walls warm in the early morning light. He laid her gently on the bed, covering her with a soft blanket. Before leaving, he placed a note on the bedside table, explaining where she was and assuring her she was safe. Hours later, Mia woke to sunlight, streaming through gauzy curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, the elegant furniture, the plush carpet, the beautiful mountain view through the windows. A breakfast tray sat on a small table nearby, the food kept warm under silver covers. A gentle knock at the door made her start. "Mia?" Graham's voice was muffled through the wood. "I hope you slept well. Everything in this room is for your use, and you can stay as long as you need to. You don't owe me anything. I want to make that very clear." Mia walked to the window, taking in the misty mountains rising majestically before her. The morning sun painted them in shades of blue and purple, a sight so different from the flat Georgia landscape she'd left behind. "Why is he being kind?" she whispered to herself, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The mountains offered no answer, but their solid presence seemed somehow reassuring, as if they too would help keep her safe. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell whisked eggs in a large ceramic bowl, humming an old hymn. The sound of footsteps made her look up to see Graham entering with a young girl, thin, pale, and clearly expecting. "Mrs. Caldwell," Graham said warmly. "This is Mia Booker. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's kind eyes took in everything, the girl's defensive posture, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, the protective hand over her belly. Without hesitation, Mrs. Caldwell set down her bowl and opened her arms. "Welcome home, dear one," she said, her voice rich with maternal warmth. Mia hesitated, then stepped forward into the embrace. Something in Mrs. Caldwell's genuine welcome broke through her walls, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "There now," Mrs. Caldwell soothed, patting her back. "You're safe here. And just in time for breakfast, too." She guided Mia to a stool at the kitchen island. "Would you like to help me make French toast?" Graham watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. "I'll leave you ladies to it," he said, heading toward his study. "I have some calls to make." Mrs. Caldwell kept Mia busy with simple tasks, mixing cinnamon into the egg mixture, buttering the griddle. As they worked, she chatted about the house, the gardens, the changing mountain weather. Never once did she press for details about Mia's situation. "Would you like to see the rest of the house after breakfast?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, setting a plate of golden French toast before Mia. "It's quite beautiful, especially in the morning light." Mia nodded, taking small, careful bites. "Yes, please, it's so big. I don't want to get lost." Mrs. Caldwell laughed softly. "Oh, you'll learn your way around quick enough. This house has a way of feeling like home before you know it." After breakfast, Mrs. Caldwell led Mia through the estate. The tour took them through elegant rooms filled with warm colors and comfortable furniture. Everything was pristine but welcoming, not like a museum, but like a well-loved home. "And this," Mrs. Caldwell said, pausing before a door, "is something special." She opened it to reveal a nursery, bathed in soft morning light. Mia's breath caught. The room was perfect. Pale yellow walls decorated with hand-painted butterflies, a white wooden crib, a rocking chair by the window overlooking the gardens. Everything looked new, yet there was a layer of dust on the surfaces. "Mr. Whitmore had this made years ago," Mrs. Caldwell explained gently. "He and his late wife were planning to adopt, but she passed before they could." She watched Mia's face carefully. "He's kept it just as it was." Mia touched the crib rail, leaving fingerprints in the dust. "It's beautiful," she whispered. They continued to the gardens, where late summer flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. Mrs. Caldwell showed Mia the vegetable patch, the herb garden, and a small greenhouse filled with tropical plants. "I could use some help with the baking this afternoon," Mrs. Caldwell suggested. "Would you like to learn how to make my famous apple cinnamon muffins?" The afternoon passed peacefully in the warm kitchen. Mrs. Caldwell taught Mia how to measure ingredients precisely, how to fold the batter just enough but not too much, how to tell when the muffins were perfectly done. The familiar motions of baking seemed to calm something in Mia's spirit. As evening approached, Graham appeared in the kitchen doorway. The smell of fresh baked muffins filled the air, and Mia was helping Mrs. Caldwell clean up, looking more relaxed than she had all day. "Mia," he said gently, "could we talk for a moment?" She tensed slightly but nodded, following him to his study. The room was warm with leather and wood, bookshelves lining the walls. Graham gestured for her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs. "Have you had any prenatal care?" he asked directly but kindly. Mia's hands twisted in her lap. "No," she whispered. When Daddy found out, he wouldn't let me see a doctor. He said—" Her voice broke. "He said I didn't deserve care after what I'd done." Graham's face tightened with controlled anger, but his voice remained gentle. "That's not right, Mia. You deserve proper medical care. Both you and your baby do." He picked up his phone. "I know an excellent obstetrician in town. Would you be willing to see her tomorrow morning?" Tears spilled down Mia's cheeks. "But I don't have any money, or insurance, or—" "Don't worry about any of that." Graham interrupted softly. "You're under my care now, and that includes medical attention. You deserve care, Mia, not punishment. Will you let us help you?" She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Graham made the call, scheduling an appointment for 10 o'clock the next morning. When he finished, he handed her a tissue. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I don't understand why you're being so kind, but thank you." "Get some rest," he replied. "Mrs. Caldwell will help you with anything you need." That night, in her room, Mia knelt beside her bed. She hadn't prayed since the day her father cast her out, feeling abandoned by both earthly and heavenly fathers. But something about this day, the warmth, the kindness, the care, moved her to try again. "Dear God," she whispered, tears rolling down her face. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for Mrs. Caldwell's hugs and Mr. Whitmore's kindness. Please help me be worthy of it." As she rose from her knees, she heard music floating up from downstairs, soft piano notes forming a familiar melody. It took her a moment to recognize the hymn. "Great is thy faithfulness." The same hymn her grandmother used to sing to her when she was small. Mia moved to the window seat, listening to Graham play. The music wrapped around her like a warm blanket, reminding her of simpler times when faith meant comfort, not condemnation. Perhaps, she thought, not all men who spoke of goodness were like her father. Perhaps some actually lived it. The mountain night spread out before her, stars twinkling above the dark peaks. Below, the piano continued its gentle song, offering a peace she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Mia felt something like hope stirring in her heart. Morning light filtered through the mountain mist as Graham's SUV wound its way down the curved roads toward town. Mia sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded protectively over her growing belly. The countryside slowly gave way to small-town streets lined with maple trees just starting to show hints of fall colors. "Dr. Sarah Morgan is one of the best in the region," Graham said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She's been serving this community for 20 years. The clinic was a modest brick building with cheerful flower boxes in the windows. As they walked through the glass doors, Mia's anxiety eased slightly at the warm atmosphere inside. The waiting room walls were painted in soft blues and decorated with local artwork. A silver-haired receptionist looked up with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Morning, Betty. This is Mia." The woman's kind eyes crinkled at the corners. "Welcome, dear. Dr. Morgan will be with you shortly." They didn't wait long before a woman in her 50s appeared, her face radiating competence and compassion. "Mia, I'm Dr. Morgan. Come on back with me." Graham stayed in the waiting room while Dr. Morgan led Mia to an examination room. The doctor's gentle manner helped Mia relax as she answered questions about her pregnancy. "How far along are you?" Dr. Morgan asked, making notes on her chart. "About 7 months, I think," Mia replied softly. The examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Morgan talked Mia through each step, explaining what she was checking and why. When she used the ultrasound machine, the sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong and steady. "There's your little one," Dr. Morgan said, pointing to the screen. "Everything looks healthy, but I am concerned about your stress levels. Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like to see." Mia watched the fuzzy image of her baby moving on the screen, tears welling in her eyes. High stress during pregnancy can lead to complications, including early labor, Dr. Morgan explained. I want you to focus on rest and reducing anxiety as much as possible. Can you do that for me?" Mia nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm prescribing some prenatal vitamins and iron supplements. You're slightly anemic, which is common in pregnancy, but we need to address it." The doctor's voice was kind but firm. "I want to see you back in 2 weeks, sooner if you experience any unusual symptoms." When they finished, Graham was waiting patiently in the reception area. Dr. Morgan spoke with him briefly about Mia's care needs while Betty scheduled the follow-up appointment. "Let's stop at the grocery store," Graham suggested as they drove away from the clinic. "We'll pick up your prescriptions and some healthy snacks Mrs. Caldwell recommended." The local grocery store was busy with late-morning shoppers. As they walked through the automatic doors, Mia noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. People stopped their conversations to stare. Whispers followed them down the aisles. "Isn't that Graham Whitmore? Who's that girl with him? Did you hear about the pregnant teenager he took in? Probably another charity case. Wonder what kind of trouble she's in." Each whispered comment felt like a physical blow. Mia tried to focus on selecting fruit from the produce section, but her hands were shaking. A pair of older women passed by, one muttering loud enough to be heard clearly. Just like her kind, getting herself in trouble and looking for a handout. Tears burned in Mia's eyes. She set down the apple she was holding and hurried towards the exit, barely able to breathe. Graham found her in the car, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, he turned to face her, his expression gentle but firm. "Mia, look at me." She raised her tear-stained face. "Shame only has power if you believe it," he said quietly. "Those people in there, they don't know you. They don't know your story. Their judgment says more about them than it does about you." "But they're right," Mia whispered. "I did get myself in trouble. I am looking for help." "There's no shame in needing help," Graham replied. "We all need it sometimes. The shame belongs to those who refuse to give it, not those who ask for it." The drive back to the estate was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. Thoughtful rather than heavy. When they arrived, Graham helped her carry the groceries inside. "I want you to rest today," he said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "Tomorrow we'll sit down and talk about your plans for the future. But for now, just focus on taking care of yourself and your baby." That evening, Mia sat in the library, curled up in an oversized armchair near the fireplace. Rain tapped against the windows, creating a soothing rhythm. Mrs. Caldwell had brought her tea and one of those apple cinnamon muffins they'd baked together. She pulled out the journal Graham had given her, a simple, leather-bound book with cream-colored pages. She hadn't written in an old journal since the day her father found out about the baby. That journal, like so many other pieces of her old life, was lost to her now. Mia opened to the first page and began to write. "Dear baby, today we heard your heartbeat for the first time. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. The doctor says you're healthy and strong, despite everything. You're already braver than I am. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if I deserve the kindness Mr. Whitmore and Mrs. Caldwell are showing me. But I promise you this. I will become someone you can be proud of, someone worthy of being your mother. The people in town today looked at me like I was nothing. Maybe they're right about who I am now, but they don't get to decide who I become. I'm going to work hard, learn everything I can, and build a life for us. A good life. You deserve better than shame and whispers. You deserve a mother who stands tall, who lives with grace and dignity. I don't know how to be that person yet, but I'm going to learn. Love your mom." Mia closed the journal, holding it against her heart. Outside, the rain continued its gentle pattern against the windows. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. Safe, but still struggling with feeling unworthy of the sanctuary she'd been given. Tomorrow would bring conversations about the future, decisions to be made. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to simply be still, listening to the rain and the fire, and her baby's quiet movements beneath her hand. 2 days passed in relative peace at the mountain estate, with Mia slowly settling into a routine. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the bay windows of the kitchen, where she'd been helping Mrs. Caldwell prepare breakfast. The peaceful atmosphere shattered when she heard Graham's sharp intake of breath from the study. Mrs. Caldwell hurried to check on him, and Mia followed, her heart pounding. Graham sat at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. Mrs. Caldwell gasped as she read over his shoulder. There, splashed across a major news website, was a headline that made Mia's blood run cold. Prominent pastor accuses billionaire of buying pregnant teen daughter. Below the headline was a grainy photo of Mia leaving her father's house with Graham, taken from someone's phone. The image made her look small and frightened, while Graham appeared imposing in his expensive suit. The article twisted everything, painting a picture of manipulation and scandal. "He's claiming I coerced him," Graham said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Says I took advantage of their family's vulnerable position to buy you." Mia's legs gave out, and she sank into a nearby chair. "No, no, no," she whispered. The phone on Graham's desk began ringing. He glanced at the caller ID and grimaced. "The Foundation." As he took the call, Mrs. Caldwell wrapped a protective arm around Mia's shoulders. They could hear the raised voices on the other end of the line. Donors were pulling out. Partner organizations were distancing themselves. The Foundation's reputation was at risk. Another call came through. Graham's company board demanding an emergency meeting. The scandal was affecting stock prices. Shareholders were concerned. Mia watched in horror as Graham's carefully built world began crumbling because of her. She stood suddenly, pulling away from Mrs. Caldwell. "I have to go," she said, voice breaking. "I can't let you lose everything because of me. I'll figure something out." She turned to flee, but Graham's voice stopped her. "Mia." She turned back, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, your work is too important. Those children need your foundation. I'm not worth losing all that." Graham stood and crossed the room to her. His expression was firm but kind, reminiscent of how he'd looked that first night in her father's study. "You are not my problem, Mia," he said quietly. "You are my responsibility because God put you here. He trusted me to protect you, and I won't fail in that trust, not for all the foundations and companies in the world." Thunder rumbled outside, and rain began pattering against the windows. Mrs. Caldwell touched Mia's arm gently. "Come sit down, dear. This stress isn't good for the baby." But as Mia took a step toward the chair, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over. "Something's wrong," she whimpered. Graham was at her side instantly. Another pain hit, stronger this time. Mrs. Caldwell's face went pale. "She's in labor. It's too early." "Call Dr. Matthews," Graham ordered, already lifting Mia into his arms. "Tell him we're coming." The drive to the hospital was terrifying. Rain poured in sheets across the windshield, thunder crashing overhead. Graham drove as fast as he dared on the winding mountain roads, while Mia gripped the door handle, trying to breathe through contractions that were coming faster and harder. "I'm scared," she whispered between pains. "I know, sweetheart," Graham answered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But you're not alone. We're almost there." The emergency room team was waiting when they arrived. They whisked Mia away to labor and delivery, while Graham called Mrs. Caldwell to update her. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. The doctors worked to slow the labor, but the baby was coming. Through it all, Graham stayed by Mia's side, letting her crush his hand during contractions, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring quiet encouragement. Finally, in the pre-dawn hours, a tiny cry filled the room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a small but perfect baby. They laid the infant on Mia's chest, and despite her exhaustion, she felt her heart expand with a love so huge it hurt. The baby's face was scrunched and red, her fingers impossibly tiny as they curled against Mia's skin. "She's my Grace," Mia whispered, touching the downy head with trembling fingers. "My little Grace." Graham stood beside the bed, watching them with soft eyes. "She's ours to protect now," he said quietly. The storm had passed, leaving behind that special stillness that follows rain. Through the hospital window, the first light of dawn filtered in, touching Grace's tiny face with golden warmth. She yawned, her little mouth forming a perfect O, and Mia felt the tears slip down her cheeks. In that moment, all the scandal and shame seemed far away. There was only this, a new life, a fresh start, and the promise of protection and love. The morning light grew stronger, painting the room in gentle gold. Baby Grace slept peacefully in her mother's arms, while Graham kept his quiet vigil beside them. Outside, a new day was beginning, but inside that hospital room, something more precious had already dawned. Hope. The mountain estate settled into a gentle rhythm in the week following Grace's birth. Early morning sunlight filtered through the nursery windows, casting warm patterns across the pale yellow walls. Mia sat in the cushioned rocking chair, cradling Grace as she nursed, while Mrs. Caldwell arranged fresh linens in the antique dresser. "There now, support her head just like that," Mrs. Caldwell instructed softly. "You're getting better at this every day, dear." Mia adjusted her hold, marveling at how something that had felt so awkward at first was becoming natural. Grace's tiny fingers curled against her skin, and Mia felt that now familiar surge of love that still surprised her with its intensity. Outside, 2 security guards patrolled the grounds. Graham had hired them immediately after bringing them home from the hospital, concerned about the growing media attention. The online world was still buzzing with speculation and judgment, but here, within these walls, Mia found herself learning what safety felt like. "Time for her bath," Mrs. Caldwell announced, bringing over the small tub. "Remember, test the water with your elbow first." Mia carefully dipped her elbow in the warm water. "Like this?" "Perfect." Mrs. Caldwell smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're a natural mother, Mia. Don't let anyone tell you different." Together, they bathed Grace, who squirmed and cooed at the sensation of warm water. Mrs. Caldwell showed Mia how to support the baby's neck, how to wash the delicate skin with gentle circles, how to wrap her snugly in a soft towel afterward. "My mother never taught me any of this," Mia said quietly, watching Mrs. Caldwell demonstrate how to clean Grace's umbilical cord area. "Well, you've got me now," Mrs. Caldwell replied firmly. "And I've helped raise enough babies in my time to know a thing or two." As the days passed, Mia found herself drawn back to the kitchen, where she'd first felt at home in this grand house. Her strength returned gradually, and with it, a desire to be useful. She started small, helping Mrs. Caldwell prepare simple meals, kneading bread dough while Grace napped in her bassinet nearby. The kitchen became her sanctuary, filled with the comforting scents of herbs and fresh-baked bread. Here she could almost forget about the cruel comments online, the whispered judgments, her father's public condemnation. Here she was just a mother, learning to care for her child, supported by people who seemed to genuinely care about her well-being. The evenings brought a different kind of peace. Graham would come home from dealing with the Foundation's crisis, loosening his tie as he entered the living room. Despite the strain showing in the lines around his eyes, he never failed to smile when he saw Grace. "How's our little angel today?" he would ask, settling into his favorite armchair. Mia would hand him the baby, watching in amazement as this powerful man transformed into someone impossibly gentle. He would cradle Grace with practiced ease, reading to her from leather-bound books of children's stories, his deep voice softening to match the tales. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon. He read one evening, Grace's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. Mia sat on the nearby sofa, needlework in her lap, forgotten as she watched them. Graham treated her with careful respect, never overstepping boundaries, never making her feel uncomfortable. He was like a father figure, but different from her own father in every way that mattered. Where Reverend Booker had been cold and demanding, Graham was warm and patient. Where her father had seen only shame, Graham saw possibility. Late at night, after Grace's last feeding, Mia would often lie awake in her bed, listening to the quiet of the house. The peace felt strange after so many months of fear and judgment. Sometimes she would get up and stand by the window, looking out at the moonlit mountains, wondering how her life had changed so dramatically. She thought about the girl she'd been just months ago, terrified, alone, convinced she was beyond redemption. Now here she was, holding her beautiful daughter, surrounded by people who treated her with kindness instead of condemnation. One morning, exactly a week after bringing Grace home, Mia found a note tucked beneath the edge of her breakfast tray. Mrs. Caldwell must have placed it there while she was changing Grace. The handwriting was neat and firm. Graham's. "Your story isn't over." It read simply. "It's just beginning." Mia traced the words with her finger, feeling something bubble up inside her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the sensation. Joy. For the first time in months, she smiled. Really smiled, the expression feeling foreign but welcome on her face. Grace cooed from her bassinet, and Mia went to pick her up, holding her close. "Did you hear that? Sweet girl," she whispered. "We're just beginning." The morning light streamed through the windows, warming them both. In the kitchen below, she could hear Mrs. Caldwell starting her daily routine, pots clinking gently on the stove. Outside, the security guards changed shifts, their quiet voices carrying across the manicured lawn. Somewhere in his study, Graham was probably already working, fighting to protect the foundation that meant so much to so many. But here in this moment, Mia felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She hummed softly to Grace, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing, its familiar melody carrying memories of simpler times. The baby's eyes, already showing hints of turning brown like her mother's, watched Mia's face with that peculiar intensity that newborns sometimes have. "I love you," Mia whispered, touching her nose to Grace's soft cheek. "No matter what happens, I'll always love you." She couldn't know that at that very moment, hundreds of miles away in Georgia, her father was sitting in his study, plotting ways to bring his wayward daughter back under his control. She couldn't know that the peace she'd found was as fragile as morning mist. For now, she was simply a young mother, holding her baby, learning to believe in new beginnings. Sunday morning dawned with a gentle mist rolling over the mountains. Mia sat cross-legged on her bed, Grace sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the tablet Mrs. Caldwell had lent her. The device's glow illuminated her face as she navigated to her father's church website, where the morning service was about to begin streaming live. She shouldn't watch. She knew that. but something drew her to it anyway. Perhaps a need to understand, or maybe just the magnetic pull of home, no matter how painful that home had been. The familiar sanctuary appeared on screen. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across the wooden pews where she'd spent countless Sundays of her life. The congregation filed in, dressed in their Sunday best, settling into their usual seats. Her father's empty pulpit loomed large in the frame. Grace stirred in her sleep, making tiny sounds that tugged at Mia's heart. She reached over to adjust the baby's blanket, her touch gentle as a whisper. The organ music swelled, and Reverend Samuel Booker strode to the pulpit, his presence commanding as ever. He wore his finest suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his bearing proud and resolute. But Mia saw something different now, something she'd never noticed before. Behind the authority in his stance lay something harder, colder. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice filling the sanctuary. "Today we speak of the prodigal daughter." Mia's breath caught in her throat. She knew instantly that he meant her. "We live in times of moral decay," he continued, his voice rising with practiced intensity. "Times when even our own children can be led astray by the world's corruption. My own daughter—" He paused for effect, and Mia watched several congregation members lean forward in their seats. "My own daughter has fallen victim to such corruption." The tablet suddenly went dark. Mia looked up, startled to find Graham standing in her doorway, the morning light casting his tall frame in silhouette. He held the remote control that controlled the room's electronics, his expression gentle but firm. "Some people," he said softly, "confuse pride for righteousness." Mia felt tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted to see—" "I know." He set the remote down and moved to sit in the chair near her bed, keeping a respectful distance. "But you don't need to hear his version of the truth to know your own." Grace chose that moment to wake, her small cries filling the room. Mia lifted her daughter, cradling her close, drawing comfort from her warmth. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" she asked Graham. He smiled, a touch of sadness in his eyes. Years of practice saying the wrong things first. The rest of the morning passed quietly, with Mia focusing on Grace's needs rather than her father's words. But around 2 o'clock, Mrs. Caldwell knocked on her door, looking concerned. "There's a reporter on the phone," she said. "From the local paper. She's asking to speak with you, dear." Graham, who had been reviewing documents in his study, appeared in the hallway. "You don't have to talk to her, Mia," he said firmly. "You owe them nothing." But something stirred in Mia's heart, a quiet certainty she hadn't felt before. Maybe I do need to talk. Not for them, but for other girls like me." Graham studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Mia said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I'm sure." The journalist's name was Sarah Chen, and her voice was kind but professional as Mrs. Caldwell connected the call. Mia sat in Graham's study, Grace sleeping against her chest, as she began to speak. "I know what people are saying about me," she started softly, "that I'm the preacher's daughter who brought shame to her family. But there's more to the story than that." For the next hour, Mia spoke from her heart. She talked about love, not just romantic love, but the deeper kind that accepts and forgives. She spoke about second chances, about how kindness from strangers had taught her more about God's grace than years of sermons ever had. "My father speaks of moral decay," she said, her voice growing stronger. "But I've learned that true morality isn't about judgment. It's about compassion. It's about seeing someone in pain and choosing to help instead of condemn." The journalist asked careful questions, and Mia answered them honestly. never attacking her father, never seeking revenge. Instead, she spoke of hope and healing, of the family she'd found in unexpected places. When the interview ended, Graham was standing, in the doorway again, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You did well," he said simply. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By evening, it had been picked up by online news sites, shared thousands of times on social media. Letters began arriving, first a few, then dozens. Women who had faced similar rejection, parents who had learned to choose love over judgment, young people who felt lost and found hope in her words. After putting Grace to bed that night, Mia found Graham sitting on the wide front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. She settled into the rocking chair beside him, wrapping herself in a soft blanket against the evening chill. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Graham was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "You remind me of her, you know," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your wife?" He nodded. Elizabeth had that same quality, that ability to forgive so completely it changed people. I used to tell her she was too soft-hearted. A small smile touched his lips. But she would just say that hard hearts never healed anyone. Mia turned to look at him, struck by the raw honesty in his voice. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Something undefined but undeniable. The moment stretched, lingering like honey in sunlight. Around them, the evening deepened into night. Cicadas began their nightly chorus, their song rising and falling in waves through the warm air. Neither spoke again, but the silence between them was full of unspoken words, of feelings too complex to name. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, each lost in their own thoughts, while the night air grew thick with emotions neither was ready to acknowledge. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Mia's kitchen table as she sorted through the mail, humming softly to Grace, who dozed in her baby carrier. Most days now felt peaceful, almost normal, until she saw the thick envelope with the law firm's letterhead. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The legal language was confusing at first, but certain phrases jumped out like daggers. Petition for custody, unfit mother, coercion and manipulation. The paper slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Her father was suing for custody of Grace. He claimed Graham had manipulated her, that she was too young to make decisions, that living with an older man proved her judgment was compromised. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, no, no." Mrs. Caldwell found her there 10 minutes later, curled around Grace's carrier, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. The housekeeper took one look at the scattered papers and immediately called Graham. He arrived home within 30 minutes, his tie loose and his face tight with concern. When he saw Mia's state, he knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me, Mia. Your father will not take Grace from you. I promise you that." She looked up at him through tear-swollen eyes. "But the papers, they say such horrible things. They're twisting everything." Graham picked up the legal documents, scanning them quickly. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I'm calling my lawyers right now, the best family law team in the state. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Over the next 3 days, Graham's study became a war room. Lawyers came and went, carrying thick folders and speaking in quiet, serious tones. They collected statements from Mrs. Caldwell, the doctor who delivered Grace, even the journalist who had interviewed Mia. Mia tried to stay strong, but fear gnawed at her constantly. She spent hours in the nursery, holding Grace close, memorizing every tiny detail of her daughter's face. The way her eyelashes fluttered when she dreamed, the perfect bow of her lips, the soft spot on her head that pulsed with her heartbeat. At night, sleep became impossible. She would pace the nursery with Grace, singing hymns her grandmother had taught her, praying until her voice gave out. Sometimes she heard Graham's footsteps in the hall, knew he was checking on them, making sure they were okay. On the fourth night, Graham found her in the kitchen at 3 a.m, making yet another cup of tea with shaking hands. "You need to rest," he said softly. "I can't." She stared into her cup. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking her away." Graham gently took the tea from her hands and led her to his study. "Then let's work. We'll go through everything again, make our case stronger." They spent hours reviewing documents, Mia telling and retelling her story while Graham's lawyer took detailed notes over the phone. She described her father's reaction to her pregnancy, the cruel words, the public humiliation. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke about finding sanctuary with Graham, about learning to be a mother, about the love that grew stronger every day between her and Grace. The sky was beginning to lighten when exhaustion finally overtook her. She fell asleep on the leather couch, Grace nestled securely against her chest. Graham watched them for a long moment, his expression soft with admiration and something deeper. He carefully draped a soft blanket over them both, tucking it gently around Grace's tiny form. In the grey pre-dawn light, he studied Mia's face, so young, yet marked by experiences that would break many grown women. "You've been through more than most grown women," he whispered, "and still, you shine." He sat in his chair, keeping watch over them until the sun rose, determined to protect this precious piece they'd found. The morning of the first court hearing arrived too quickly. Mia dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that Mrs. Caldwell had altered to fit her post-pregnancy body. She fed Grace early, packed extra diapers and bottles, and tried to steady her, trembling hands as she buckled her daughter into the car seat. Graham appeared beside her, looking sharp in his dark suit. "Ready?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The drive to the courthouse was quiet, broken only by Grace's occasional coos. Graham reached over once to squeeze Mia's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about his support and determination. As they pulled into the parking lot, Mia saw the news vans and reporters gathered near the entrance. Her heart rate spiked. "We'll go through the back," Graham said firmly. "Security is waiting for us." He helped her out of the car, shielding both her and Grace from view with his broad shoulders. They moved quickly through a side entrance, where court officers escorted them to a private waiting room. Mia sat down, holding Grace close, trying to draw strength from her daughter's warmth. Graham's lawyers arrived, carrying briefcases and speaking in hushed, confident tones. "Remember," Graham said, kneeling in front of her chair, "you're not alone in this. We're going to fight with everything we have." She looked into his eyes, seeing the same fierce protectiveness that she felt for Grace. "I know," she whispered. "Thank you." They could hear people filing into the courtroom next door. Soon they would face her father, face his accusations, face the judgment of strangers. But in this moment, with Graham's steady presence beside her and Grace's weight in her arms, Mia found a well of courage she didn't know she possessed. She stood up, adjusting Grace in her arms, and squared her shoulders. "I'm ready." Graham nodded, pride evident in his expression. Together, they moved toward the courtroom doors, prepared to fight for the family they had become. The courtroom's polished oak benches creaked under the weight of spectators. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Mia sat beside Graham, clutching Grace to her chest while their lawyer arranged papers on the defense table. Across the aisle, Reverend Samuel Booker sat ramrod straight in his pressed black suit and crisp white clerical collar. His presence seemed to fill the room with an oppressive authority that made Mia's throat tighten. She noticed how he avoided looking at Grace, his own granddaughter, as if she were invisible. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Martha Wilson presiding. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, took her seat and reviewed the preliminary documents. "We're here today regarding the custody petition for infant Grace Booker. Please state your appearances for the record." The lawyers introduced themselves. Reverend Booker's attorney, Mr. Patterson, stood first, a sharp-featured man whose expensive suit matched his client's air of superiority. "Your Honor," Patterson began, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "this is a clear case of exploitation. Mr. Whitmore has used his considerable resources to house a minor without proper authority. We have evidence suggesting charitable funds were misappropriated for personal use." Graham's lawyer, Sarah Chen, rose calmly. "Your Honor, we'll demonstrate that Mr. Whitmore provided emergency shelter to a pregnant teenager who was abandoned by her father. His actions were legal and ethical." The judge nodded. "Proceed with your first witness, Mr. Patterson. I call Reverend Samuel Booker to the stand." Mia watched her father stride to the witness box, every movement calculated to project dignity and righteousness. After being sworn in, he settled into the chair like it was his pulpit. "Reverend Booker," Patterson began, "please describe the events leading to your daughter's situation." "It pains me deeply," Reverend Booker said, his voice heavy with practiced grief, "to speak of my daughter's fall from grace. We raised her in the church, taught her right from wrong, but she chose to disgrace herself and our family name. When Mr. Whitmore appeared, offering to take her in, I feared his motives weren't pure." Mia's hands trembled. Grace stirred against her chest, and she focused on her daughter's warmth to stay strong. "And why did you sign over temporary guardianship?" Patterson asked. "I believed it was God's way of protecting our church from scandal. Now I see it was a terrible mistake. This man has no right to my daughter or my grandchild." During cross-examination, Sarah Chen approached the stand with quiet determination. "Reverend Booker, did you ever take Mia to prenatal appointments?" "That would have validated her sin." "Did you provide any support during her pregnancy?" "Support would have encouraged moral failure." "So you admit to denying basic medical care to your minor daughter?" The Reverend's jaw tightened. "I was protecting her soul." When it was Mia's turn to testify, Graham squeezed her hand as she passed Grace to Mrs. Caldwell, who had come to help. The walk to the witness stand felt endless. She could feel her father's disapproving stare burning into her back. "Miss Booker," Patterson began his questioning, "isn't it true that Mr. Whitmore essentially purchased you from your father?" "Objection!" Sarah Chen stood quickly. "Sustained," Judge Wilson said sharply. "Mr. Patterson, what's your characterizations?" Patterson adjusted his approach. "Why did you agree to live with a man nearly 3 times your age?" Mia took a deep breath, her voice small but clear. "Because he showed me the love of a father when mine forgot how." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. From the corner of her eye, Mia saw her father's composure crack slightly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Mr. Whitmore gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go," she continued, stronger now. "He made sure I got medical care. He protected me when the press attacked. He's never asked for anything in return except that I take care of myself and my baby." "And you expect us to believe his motives were purely charitable?" "I expect you to believe the truth," Mia said quietly. "Graham Whitmore saved 2 lives, mine and my daughter's. That's what real Christianity looks like." The Reverend's face darkened at these words. Several people in the gallery murmured in agreement with Mia's statement. After hearing testimonies from Mrs. Caldwell and Mia's doctor, Judge Wilson leaned forward. "I'm postponing my verdict pending further review of the evidence and home study reports. Until then, the current living arrangement will continue under court supervision. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks." The drive home was quiet, everyone processing the day's events. Grace slept peacefully in her car seat, unaware of the battle being fought over her future. Back at the estate, Mrs. Caldwell prepared a light dinner, but Mia could barely eat. She sat in the living room, holding Grace and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Graham brought her a cup of chamomile tea, settling into the armchair across from her. "You did something remarkable today," he said softly. "I was terrified," Mia admitted, adjusting Grace's blanket. "But you spoke from your heart. That kind of truth. It's something no amount of money could buy." He smiled gently. "You showed incredible bravery." Mia felt tears welling up. "I just didn't want him to hurt Grace the way he hurt me." "He won't," Graham assured her. "We won't let that happen." They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the peaceful moment as Grace slept between them. The tea warmed Mia's hands, and for the first time since receiving the lawsuit notice, she felt hope flutter in her chest. Suddenly, bright flashes lit up the windows. Camera lights, voices carried from the front gate where reporters had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the scandal's central figures. Graham quickly moved to close the curtains, his jaw set with determination. "I'll have security clear them out." Mia held Grace closer, the peace of their moment shattered by the harsh reminder that their story had become public property. But as she looked at Graham's protective stance, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun streamed through the estate's windows, but it brought no warmth. Mia sat at the breakfast table, pushing food around her plate while Mrs. Caldwell watched with concern. The phone rang, making them both jump. Graham answered in his study. Minutes later, his footsteps echoed heavily down the hall. His face was ashen when he entered the kitchen. "Mia," he said softly, "we need to talk." She knew. Something in his voice made her stomach drop. "What happened?" "The judge granted temporary custody to your father pending appeal." Graham's voice cracked. "They're coming to take Grace today." The room spun. Mia gripped the table edge, her knuckles white. "No," she whispered. "No, they can't." Mrs. Caldwell moved to hold her, but Mia was already running upstairs to the nursery. She scooped Grace from her crib, holding her close, breathing in her baby powder scent. "They won't take you," she promised fiercely. "They can't." But an hour later, police cars pulled up to the estate. 2 officers and a social worker walked up the path, while Reverend Booker waited in his car, a self-satisfied expression on his face. Graham met them at the door. "Please," he said, "give us a moment." Upstairs, Mia was hysterical. She had barricaded herself in the nursery, clutching Grace to her chest as the baby began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. "Mia!" Graham called through the door. "Sweetheart, we have to let them in." "They'll hurt her," Mia sobbed. "Daddy will make her feel worthless, just like he did to me." "Listen to me." Graham's voice was gentle but firm. "If we resist, it'll hurt our appeal. We have to do this legally. I promise you, I promise with everything I am, we will get her back." Mrs. Caldwell added softly, "He's right, dear. Don't give your father more ammunition." Several agonizing minutes passed before they heard the lock click. Mia stood trembling, tears streaming down her face as she kissed Grace's forehead again and again. The social worker stepped forward. "I know this is hard," she said kindly, "but we have a court order." "Please," Mia begged. "She's never been away from me. She's still nursing. She needs me." We've brought formula," the social worker explained, "and your father has hired a nanny." Graham placed a steady hand on Mia's shoulder. "Remember what our lawyer said. Every action now affects the appeal." With shaking hands, Mia handed over Grace's diaper bag. "Her favorite blanket is inside. She can't sleep without it. And her medicine for colic, she needs 3 drops before bedtime. Please." The social worker nodded, taking notes. When she reached for Grace, Mia's arms tightened instinctively. Graham held her gently as she finally released her grip on her baby. Grace's cries echoed through the house as they carried her away. Through the window, they watched Reverend Booker's car drive off with their precious cargo inside. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia collapsed into Graham's arms, her grief too deep for tears now. He held her as she shook, murmuring prayers and promises. The days that followed were dark. The house felt like a tomb, Grace's empty nursery a wound that wouldn't heal. Mia stopped eating, spending hours staring at nothing. Mrs. Caldwell tried tempting her with favorite foods, but everything tasted like ash. Graham threw himself into the appeal process with desperate intensity. He worked through nights, coordinating with lawyers, gathering evidence, pushing himself beyond exhaustion. Mrs. Caldwell would find him asleep at his desk, legal papers scattered around him. "You're going to make yourself sick," she warned, but he wouldn't listen. One evening, a week after losing Grace, Mia heard a crash from Graham's study. She ran to find him collapsed on the floor, papers everywhere, his face grey with pain. "Graham!" She dropped to her knees beside him. His breathing was shallow, one hand clutching his chest. Mrs. Caldwell rushed in, immediately calling 911. "Heart attack," she said tersely into the phone. "Hurry!" Mia held Graham's hand, tears falling. "Please," she begged. "Don't leave me too. I can't lose you both. Please, Graham." His fingers squeezed hers weakly as paramedics arrived, loading him onto a stretcher. Mrs. Caldwell drove Mia to the hospital, breaking speed limits the whole way. In the emergency room, Mia paced, her hands clasped in constant prayer. Hours passed in an agony of waiting. Finally, they let her see him in the cardiac unit. He looked small in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around him. Mia sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering words of encouragement. Suddenly, the monitors screamed. Graham's hand went limp in hers as the heart monitor displayed a flat line. "Code blue!" a nurse shouted, pushing Mia aside as doctors rushed in. She stood frozen, watching them work on Graham, her trembling hands pressed together in desperate prayer. "Please, God," she whispered. "Not him too. Please, not him too." The high-pitched whine of the flat-lined monitor filled the room as doctors shouted orders, working frantically to restart Graham's heart. Mia could only watch in horror, her own heart seeming to stop with each passing second. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead as Mia jerked awake, her neck stiff from sleeping in the uncomfortable chair. Her clothes from the night before were wrinkled, and her mouth felt dry. For a moment she was disoriented. Then the memories came rushing back. Graham collapsing, the ambulance, the terrifying flatline. A nurse in light blue scrubs approached her, clipboard in hand. "Miss Booker?" Mia sat up straight, her heart pounding. "Yes? How is he?" The nurse's face softened with kindness. "Mr. Whitmore is stable now. His heart did stop briefly during the night, but we were able to revive him. He's in recovery." Relief flooded through Mia's body, making her legs weak. "He's alive? Really alive?" "Yes, honey. He's sleeping now, but he pulled through. The doctor says the heart attack was brought on by extreme stress and exhaustion. He'll need lots of rest and careful monitoring, but he should recover well." Tears streamed down Mia's face as she whispered, "Thank you, God." "He's in room 312. The nurse added with a small smile. He's not supposed to have visitors yet, but... She glanced around conspiratorially. I might look the other way if someone sneaks in for just a few minutes. Mia found Graham's room easily. She slipped inside, her heart aching at the sight of him looking so vulnerable in the hospital bed. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking his vital signs. His face was pale, but peaceful in sleep. She moved quietly to his bedside, gently taking his hand in hers. It was warm, wonderfully, beautifully warm with life. Tears fell freely as she stroked his fingers. "Oh, Graham," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You took me in when I had nothing. You showed me what real kindness looks like." She wiped her eyes with her free hand. "You taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that some people really do mean what they say about helping others." His fingers twitched slightly in hers, and his eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with medication but focused on her face. "You..." His voice was barely a whisper. "Saved me too." "Shh," she soothed, squeezing his hand. "Don't try to talk. Just rest." "The appeal," he started to say, but she cut him off. "I'm going to handle it. You focus on getting better." She smiled through her tears. "That's an order, Mr. Whitmore." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he drifted back to sleep. Back in the waiting room, Mia pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and called their lawyer, David Chen. "Mia, how's Graham?" David asked immediately. "He's stable now, thank God, but he needs complete rest. No work, no stress." She took a deep breath. "Which means I need to step up with the custody case." "Are you sure? We could request a delay." "No," Mia said firmly. "My father's had Grace for a week already. That's too long. I've been thinking, maybe it's time people heard the whole story. Not just the lies my father's telling, but everything." David was quiet for a moment. "That could be powerful, but are you ready for that kind of exposure?" "I have to be. For Grace, for Graham, for every other girl who's been told she's worthless because she made a mistake." After discussing details with David, Mia returned to the estate. Mrs. Caldwell met her with a tight hug and hot tea. "Graham's going to be okay," Mia told her, "but I need your help with something." In Graham's study, they set up his professional camera equipment. Mrs. Caldwell adjusted the lighting while Mia sat in the leather chair, gathering her courage. "Ready when you are, dear," Mrs. Caldwell said softly. Mia looked directly into the camera lens. "My name is Mia Booker. I'm 17 years old, and this is my story." For the next 2 hours, she spoke from her heart. She talked about growing up as the preacher's daughter, always trying to be perfect. She described the boy who pressured her, then abandoned her when she got pregnant. Through tears, she recounted her father's reaction, not concern for her well-being, but rage over his reputation. She spoke about Graham, his kindness, his respect, his genuine desire to help without asking anything in return. She described the joy of Grace's birth, the peace of their days together, and the agony of having her baby taken away. "I made a mistake," she said near the end, her voice strong and clear. "But my baby isn't a mistake. She's a gift, and she deserves to be raised with love, not shame. She deserves to know that God's love is bigger than human judgment." Mrs. Caldwell had tears streaming down her face as she stopped recording. "That was beautiful, child." They spent the next hour editing the video, then posted it online with the hashtag #JusticeForMia. Mrs. Caldwell shared it through Graham's Foundation's social media accounts. By midnight, the video had 10,000 views. By dawn, it had reached 1 million. Mia's phone began buzzing constantly with notifications. The video was being shared across platforms, with celebrities and influencers amplifying her message. News outlets were requesting interviews. But what touched her most were the messages from other young mothers sharing their own stories of judgment and rejection. Many included donations to help with legal fees, ranging from $5 to $5,000. "Look at this." She showed Mrs. Caldwell her phone screen. "People are starting GoFundMe campaigns for young mothers in crisis. They're offering safe houses, counseling, support groups." Mrs. Caldwell hugged her tight. "You've started something bigger than yourself, dear. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell our truth." The hashtag #JusticeForMia trended nationwide. Public opinion began shifting dramatically as people contrasted Mia's genuine, heartfelt testimony with her father's cold condemnation. David called early that morning. "Mia, this is incredible. The judge has agreed to review the custody decision in light of new evidence. And," he paused significantly, "several former members of your father's congregation have come forward with their own stories about his abuse of power." Hope bloomed in Mia's chest as she stared out the window at the morning sun. Maybe, just maybe, the truth really would set them free. The courthouse steps gleamed in the morning sun as Mia smoothed her simple navy dress. 3 days had passed since her video testimony went viral, changing everything. Mrs. Caldwell had helped her choose the outfit, modest but dignified, with a white cardigan that made her look both young and maternal. Inside the marble hallway, reporters clustered with their cameras, but security kept them at a respectful distance. David Chen, their lawyer, approached with the encouraging smile. "The video changed public opinion completely," he explained, showing Mia his tablet. "Over 2 million signatures on the petition for custody review, and the stories from your father's congregation." Mia nodded solemnly. In the past 48 hours, dozens of families had come forward with accounts of Reverend Booker's emotional manipulation and spiritual abuse. Former church members described years of public shaming, forced confessions, and cruel guidance that had driven many away from faith entirely. The courtroom doors opened. Mia's heart jumped when she saw Graham being wheeled in by Mrs. Caldwell. He'd insisted on leaving the hospital to be here, though he still looked pale. "You should be resting," Mia whispered, touching his shoulder. "Couldn't miss this," he replied with a weak smile. "You've earned this moment." The bailiff called everyone to order. Judge Eleanor Martinez entered, her expression grave as she surveyed the packed courtroom. Reverend Booker sat with his lawyers, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. A social worker brought in baby Grace, who was fussy and crying. Mia's arms ached to hold her, but she forced herself to stay seated as David had advised. "We are here to review the temporary custody order regarding Grace Booker." Judge Martinez began. "In light of substantial new evidence and public testimony, this court will hear final arguments." Reverend Booker's lawyer spoke first, trying to paint Mia as an unstable teenager and Graham as a manipulative influence. But his arguments felt hollow against the weight of public truth. When it was Mia's turn to speak, she rose slowly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The courtroom fell silent. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I stand before you not just as a mother fighting for her child, but as a daughter who knows both judgment and grace." She paused, looking directly at her father for the first time in weeks. "My father taught me about God's love from the pulpit every Sunday, but when I needed that love most, he chose pride instead. He gave me away like I was nothing. But God had other plans." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Through Mr. Whitmore's kindness, I learned that true faith isn't about punishment, it's about second chances, about seeing the worth in people when they can't see it in themselves." Grace's cries had quieted. The baby watched her mother with wide eyes. "I forgive my father," Mia continued, her voice softening. I forgive him because holding on to anger would only teach my daughter that love is conditional. He gave me away, but God gave me back through love." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Mia glanced at her father and saw something she'd never witnessed before, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his hands. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, studying Mia intently. "Ms. Booker, your maturity today is remarkable. This court has reviewed extensive evidence, including character testimony from community members, medical records, and documentation of your current living situation." She shuffled through papers on her desk. "The temporary custody order is hereby vacated. Full custody of Grace Booker is awarded to her mother, Mia Booker. Furthermore, all claims against Graham Whitmore are dismissed as baseless and potentially malicious." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "This case is closed." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement. The social worker immediately brought Grace to Mia, who clutched her daughter close, breathing in her sweet baby smell as tears of relief streamed down her face. David handed her the official custody papers, which she pressed against her heart. It was real. It was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. But Mia barely noticed them. Graham waited by his car, looking exhausted but happy. "You did it," he whispered as she approached. Mia shook her head, adjusting Grace in her arms. "No," she replied softly. "We did." Looking up at the man who had changed her life, she saw tears in his eyes too. Mrs. Caldwell appeared with Graham's wheelchair, clucking about him needing rest. Before they could leave, a commotion near the courthouse doors drew their attention. Reverend Booker stood there, looking lost and smaller somehow, without his usual righteous anger. For a long moment, father and daughter looked at each other across the distance. Then Mia did something that surprised everyone. She walked over to him, still holding Grace. "Would you like to meet your granddaughter?" she asked quietly. Properly this time. Her father's hands trembled as he reached out to touch Grace's tiny fingers. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I was so wrong." Mia nodded, her heart full of something that felt like peace. "I know, but Grace is teaching us all about new beginnings." They stood there on the courthouse steps, 3 generations bound by pain but healing through love, while cameras flashed and reporters called questions. None of it mattered. What mattered was the way Grace reached out and grabbed her grandfather's finger, holding on tight, like forgiveness made flesh, like hope made real. The late summer breeze carried the scent of blooming gardenias through the open windows of Graham Whitmore's estate. 2 weeks had passed since the courthouse victory, and life was finally settling into a peaceful rhythm. Mia sat in the nursery's rocking chair, humming softly as she fed Grace. The morning light painted patterns across the pale yellow walls, and somewhere downstairs Mrs. Caldwell was making breakfast, the familiar clatter of pots and pans drifting up the stairs. "There's my girls," Graham said from the doorway, his voice warm. He'd recovered enough to walk short distances, though Mrs. Caldwell still insisted he use the wheelchair for longer ones. "Someone's hungry this morning." Mia smiled, adjusting Grace's blanket. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Graham admitted, moving to sit in the window seat. "The house feels different now, more alive." He was right. Music played often now, sometimes from the kitchen radio, sometimes from Graham's piano downstairs. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. Even the gardens seemed brighter, as if nature itself celebrated their joy. Later that morning, they gathered in Graham's study. Papers covered his desk, blueprints, legal documents, and financial projections. "The Grace home," Mrs. Caldwell read from the top page, adjusting her reading glasses. It's perfect. The idea had come to Mia one sleepless night as she watched Grace dream. How many other girls were out there carrying the same shame she once did? How many needed someone to show them love instead of judgment? Graham had listened intently when she shared her vision over breakfast the next day. By lunch, he was already making calls. "We'll convert the old Carter property," he explained now, spreading out the blueprints. 20 private rooms, each with its own bathroom, a communal kitchen, counseling offices, classrooms for continuing education, and a nursery bigger than this whole floor, Mrs. Caldwell added, bouncing Grace gently in her arms. Mia traced the lines on the paper with trembling fingers. "Will people support it?" "They already are." Graham smiled, pulling up his laptop. "The video you made? It's inspired donations from across the country. People want to help, Mia. They just needed someone brave enough to show them how." Over the next few days, the project took shape rapidly. Graham's efficiency combined with Mia's passion proved unstoppable. Mrs. Caldwell coordinated with local contractors while juggling baby duties, somehow making it all look effortless. Mia found herself doing interviews, first local news, then national. She spoke honestly about her experience, about shame and redemption, about the transformative power of unconditional love. "Every girl deserves a second chance," became her motto, repeated in newspapers and social media. Letters poured in from teenage mothers across the country, sharing their stories, offering support. The renovation work progressed quickly, funded by Graham's Foundation and supplemented by community donations. Local churches, except for her father's, offered volunteers. Women's groups organized furniture drives. A nearby technical college proposed free parenting classes for residents. 3 weeks before the opening ceremony, Mia received an unexpected letter. Her father's handwriting, once so intimidating, looked shaky on the envelope. "You don't have to read it," Graham said softly, finding her frozen in the kitchen. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to." Inside was a simple note. "I would like to attend the opening, if you'll allow it. Dad." Mia showed the note to Graham, who squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your choice, sweetheart. Always your choice." She wrote back one word. "Come." The morning of the opening ceremony dawned clear and bright. The Grace home stood transformed, a Victorian mansion renewed, its fresh paint gleaming in the sunlight. Flowers lined the walkway, and a red ribbon stretched across the front steps. Inside, Mrs. Caldwell directed an army of volunteers, arranging refreshments and straightening furniture. "These chairs aren't going to align themselves," she called, making Mia laugh despite her nerves. Graham found her in one of the resident rooms, staring out the window. "Having second thoughts?" She turned, smiling through tears. "Happy ones. Look at this room, Graham. This bed, these curtains, that little crib in the corner. Some scared girl is going to walk in here and feel safe for the first time in months." He moved closer, his steps steady now. "Because of you, Mia, you turned your pain into purpose. Because you showed me how," she corrected softly. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By 1:30, cars lined the street. Local news vans set up cameras. Church buses arrived carrying entire congregations. Politicians mingled with social workers. Teachers stood beside pastors. Mia wore a simple blue dress, holding Grace in a matching outfit. Graham, handsome in a grey suit, stood beside them on the porch as people gathered on the lawn. And there, at the back of the crowd, stood Reverend Booker. He wore no clerical collar today, just a plain black suit. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. When Mia stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent. "Welcome to the Grace home," she began, her voice clear and strong. Some of you know my story. Some of you lived it with me. But today isn't about the past. It's about the future. About creating a place where judgment ends and healing begins." She looked down at Grace, peaceful in her arms. "My daughter taught me that love is stronger than shame. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build something better from the broken pieces." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some wiped tears. "Every girl who walks through these doors will find what I found: safety, support, and a chance to rewrite her story. Because every girl deserves a second chance. Every baby deserves a peaceful beginning. And every heart deserves the chance to heal." Applause thundered across the lawn. Graham handed Mia the scissors, and together they cut the ribbon. As it fell, Grace reached out and caught a piece in her tiny fist, making everyone laugh. The reception lasted hours. People toured the rooms, signed up to volunteer, wrote checks for donations. Mia's father stayed in the background, watching silently, accepting his role as observer rather than leader. As sunset painted the sky pink and orange, the last guests departed. Mrs. Caldwell shooed Graham and Mia onto the back porch, insisting she could handle the cleanup. "Go rest," she ordered. "You've earned it." They sat in the old wooden rockers, Grace sleeping peacefully in her portable crib between them. The evening air was sweet with honeysuckle, and crickets began their nightly symphony. "Thank you," Mia said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Graham turned to her, his eyes questioning. "For believing in me," she explained, "for showing me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's just love choosing love over and over again." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The warmth of their joined hands said everything, while Grace slept on, dreaming baby dreams of a world made gentle by Grace. The crickets sang louder, accompanying the quiet music of three hearts beating in perfect harmony as twilight deepened into dusk. The autumn evening settled softly over the mountain estate, painting the sky in brush strokes of amber and rose. Graham stood on the wraparound porch, his hands resting on the wooden railing as he watched the sun sink behind distant peaks. Inside, through the window, he could hear Mia humming a lullaby to Grace. The sound drew him like a gentle tide. These past months had changed everything. His quiet house now filled with life, his lonely evenings transformed by the presence of two souls who'd somehow become essential to his happiness. But with that joy came an ache he couldn't ignore any longer. Mia stepped out onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind her. "She's finally asleep," she whispered, smiling, "though I don't know for how long." Graham turned to look at her, his heart tightening in his chest. The setting sun caught the gold in her hair, and her eyes held a peace he'd watched grow day by day. No longer the frightened girl who'd arrived at his door. She'd blossomed into a woman of quiet strength and profound grace. "Mia," he said softly, his voice carrying weight. "There's something I need to tell you." She moved closer, concern crossing her features. "Is everything okay?" He drew a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've been fighting something for months now, something I thought I had no right to feel." Mia's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting. "I've fallen in love with you," he confessed, the words finally breaking free. "I tried not to. Lord knows I tried. You're so young and I'm old enough to be your father. I kept telling myself it was wrong, that I was betraying your trust, that my guilt over Helen's death meant I didn't deserve." His voice caught, and Mia stepped closer, tears beginning to shine in her eyes. "But watching you with Grace, seeing your strength, your forgiveness, your pure heart, it's changed me, Mia. You've changed me. and I can't pretend anymore that what I feel is anything less than love." Tears spilled down Mia's cheeks as she whispered, "I thought I was the only one." Graham's heart stuttered. "What?" "I've loved you for so long," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, kind, protective. You healed parts of me I thought would stay broken forever. But I was scared. Scared you only saw me as a child to protect." Through the window, they could hear Grace's soft cooing, like a gentle backdrop to this moment of truth between them. Graham reached out, taking Mia's hand in his. It felt small and warm, fitting perfectly within his grasp. Would it be so wrong, he asked quietly, for God to turn mercy into love? Mia shook her head, a smile breaking through her tears. "It would be wrong to waste what he's blessed," she whispered. The words settled between them like a prayer answered. Graham drew her closer, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. The mountain air swirled around them, carrying the scent of pine and late-blooming flowers. As the last rays of sunlight painted the clouds in deep purple and gold, they held each other, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting like morning fog off the mountains. It was a moment of pure redemption, all the pain, all the judgment, all the lonely nights transformed into something beautiful. Their love had grown not from desperate need or shallow attraction, but from months of shared struggles, quiet strength, and unwavering faith in each other. Inside, Grace cooed again, as if offering her own blessing to this new chapter in their story. The sound made them both smile, their hearts full with the knowledge that love, in its truest form, could heal even the deepest wounds. They stood there as twilight deepened, neither rushing to break the peaceful silence. Everything that needed to be said had been spoken, and now they could simply be, two hearts made whole by grace, mercy, and a love that had grown as steadily as the mountains around them. 1 year later, the mountain estate had transformed into something extraordinary. The Grace home stood as a beacon of hope, its elegant architecture now housing dreams instead of secrets. The morning sun painted the white columns in shades of gold, while flower gardens, planted and tended by the residents themselves, spread color across the grounds like a patchwork quilt. Mia walked through the quiet halls, her footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. Baby Grace, now a bright-eyed toddler, rested contentedly on her hip, tiny fingers playing with her mother's pendant, a silver cross Graham had given her months ago. "Good morning, Sarah," Mia called warmly to a young mother rocking her newborn by the window. "How was your first night?" Sarah, barely 16 and still carrying fear in her eyes, managed a small smile. "Better than at home. Thank you, Miss Mia." "Just Mia," she corrected gently, adjusting Grace on her hip. "We're family here." Grace reached out toward Sarah's baby, babbling happily. The simple gesture made Sarah's smile grow more genuine, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. As Mia continued her morning rounds, she greeted each resident by name. There was Jenny, learning to knit baby booties in the common room. Maria, studying for her GED at the kitchen table, while her 3-month-old slept peacefully nearby. Katie, tending to the herb garden that supplied their kitchen, her growing belly catching the morning light. Each girl had arrived like Mia once had, scared, ashamed, believing they'd reached the end of their story. But here, surrounded by understanding and unconditional love, they were writing new chapters. Mrs. Caldwell appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mia, dear, shouldn't you be getting ready? The hairdresser will be here any minute." Mia's heart fluttered. Today wasn't just any day, it was her wedding day. "I just needed to check on everyone first," she explained, but Mrs. Caldwell was already shooing her towards the stairs. "These girls are fine," the older woman insisted, taking Grace into her arms. "Today is your day." Upstairs in her room, Mia found her wedding dress hanging by the window. Simple, elegant, with delicate lace that caught the light like morning frost. As she ran her fingers over the fabric, she remembered the day Graham had proposed, right here in this room. He'd knocked on her door late one evening, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. "I have something to ask you," he'd said, "but first I want you to read this." He'd handed her a letter from her father, Reverend Booker's blessing for their marriage, along with his offer to perform the ceremony. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes. So much had changed in a year. Hours later, Mia stood before the mirror in her wedding dress, hardly recognizing herself. Her hair fell in soft waves, decorated with tiny white flowers. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, making her look both innocent and mature, a bridge between who she'd been and who she'd become. "You look beautiful," came a deep voice from the doorway. Reverend Booker stood there, his eyes glistening. "Daddy," Mia whispered, turning to face him. He stepped into the room, his hands trembling slightly. "I've practiced what to say to you 1,000 times, but now—" He swallowed hard. "I was wrong, Mia, so terribly wrong. You showed me what real faith looks like, not in grand gestures or strict rules, but in love and forgiveness." Mia crossed the room and hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave. "I forgave you long ago, Daddy." Outside, guests were gathering on the church steps, the very steps where, a year ago, Mia had stood in shame. Now they were decorated with white roses and ribbons, transformed like everything else in her life. Graham waited at the altar, looking handsome in his dark suit. When the music began and Mia appeared on her father's arm, his eyes filled with tears, Mrs. Caldwell stood nearby, holding Grace, who wore a tiny white dress matching her mother's. Reverend Booker's voice shook as he began the ceremony. "We gather today to witness love's power to heal, to transform, and to make all things new." The congregation, filled with Grace Home residents, community members, and supporters, listened intently as he continued. "I've learned that true righteousness isn't found in judgment but in mercy. My daughter taught me that. And today, as I join her with this good man, I am humbled to say, love covers a multitude of sins." Mia and Graham exchanged their vows with quiet confidence, their words carrying the weight of everything they'd overcome together. "I promise to love you with the same grace you showed me," Mia said, her voice clear and strong. "To build our family on faith, forgiveness, and unconditional love." Graham's response was equally moving. "I promise to cherish you as the gift you are, to protect our family with everything I have, and to thank God every day for bringing you into my life." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Grace, watching from Mrs. Caldwell's arms, let out a delighted giggle that echoed through the church. At that moment, as if on cue, a flock of white doves rose into the golden afternoon sky, their wings catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Mia held Grace close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. "Look at those doves, baby," she whispered, pointing to the sky. "See how free they are? That's what grace does. It sets us free. Grace wins, baby. Grace always wins." Grace reached towards the sky with tiny fingers, her eyes wide with wonder. Around them, the celebration continued, a testament to love's power to transform lives, heal wounds, and create family from fragments. The church steps, once a place of judgment, had become holy ground of a different kind, sanctified not by ritual or tradition, but by the pure, unstoppable power of grace. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.